In the shadow of the barn, sounds arrive over the mounded lines of soil, peep and bell and rustle and snuff, airs played on the full moon. We put away the tables after selling all the bread, quilts are folded again, and the cider settles as the summer sun over brown earth. Plated fields stretch beneath me. The moon distributes light over all. Mountains, rivers of silver, above these, the storm clouds of trees. There is an owl there, I heard, plying that pale darkness, but now an even paler oarsman, upright among the tangled shards, poles home.
I think every kid likes to draw, and they want to make images of one kind or another for whatever reason, I'm not sure, but I was always making images, and along the way I realized that I did not deal with figures, although I have since then, but very, very seldom. So it all turned into landscape, and essentially everything I've done in 43 years has been landscape-oriented or abstract.
When you think of Jim's work, and I think the reason that to talk about the difference or why he's a cut above, it's just elegant, for one thing. It's very well crafted, and it's compelling.
I think he, again, is one of the few artists I know who can get richness out of black and white. Richness out of a lot of empty white space. He lets the art breathe on the page. So the simplicity of the presentation coupled with the richness of the text and image, I think is just characteristic of his work.
My name is Kate Leonard. I am married to Jim Koss, who is the focus of the film that we're making, and I also am a book artist on my own. I think all of his precision creates a physical presence for the work that is part of its invitation. And then there's actually reading the words, actually looking at the images, and whether a viewer feels an immediate understanding or just is provoked to think about what the meaning might be, there is that invitation.
He was very introspective. He was very quiet. He thought before he spoke. He was your atypical artist, the artist always, to me, I see their ego come in the door before they enter the door. And Jim was one of these people that was incredibly kind and very talented. And what attracted us to it, it was always done by himself. He's a wonderful wood maker. He makes his own boxes. He makes his own prints. The type is hand set. He writes his own poetry. And when we see artists that do everything by hand, it's something we really appreciate. It's something that we've always looked for in an artist. And Jim's work was not just from the hand, but from the heart. It was just always beautifully done.
So the spirit strode, the night a dazzling green, powerful, sight conjuring selves hand in hand in hand, prophetic as the single blinking eye or smile, carrying the other side of that night like the wisps of printed papers in a paper bag. Fuses to a scorching hope, even the bag itself warmed as it embraces, is embraced.
In general, artist books are small edition works by visual artists who may work in other forms. They may make music, they may make movies, they may make theater productions, but it's a way of taking text, sometimes image, sometimes only image, and putting it in the hands of a reader. It's, I think, the thing that differentiates it from all other kinds of art is it's very personal and it needs to be held in the hand. It mostly is something where you turn the pages in order to create narrative. That's about as close as I can get to a definition.
As far as artists' books and why that medium for some artists, it's because the answer that we have gotten from several of them is that they have more of a narrative to tell than just like a hang-on-the-piece traditional art. And so they like that narrative form where they can unfold as they go through the book form and they can tell a full story.
For me, artist books, the book part of it is that very intimate nature of the thing. These are meant for laps rather than hung on walls. If you can't turn the pages, hear the paper, feel the paper, sometimes smell and taste the things, use all your senses, you're not getting the essence of the artist book.
Sometimes it starts with a text, and then the images follow. Sometimes it starts with the images, and then the text follows. Sometimes it starts with a dream, like got a piece in New York Public called Leaping Wheel, which is a really, really cool book. And that started out from a dream. I just got the title in my head one night. And I said, oh, okay, what am I going to do with this? So it always boils down to, I got this, what am I going to do with it?
With his artwork, some of it is very representational, but quite a lot of it is he's trying to capture color or movement, especially movement. I always have the feeling that when you're looking, especially at his Prismacolors, I can almost see them moving in the wind. He has this way of capturing how something folds when it's in the middle of being blown around that I find really amazing.
It's a process of evolution of one kind or another. Sometimes things come really quickly. Sometimes things take a really long time. I've spent 2 years on a book. I've spent 20 years on a book. I spent a day making a book. It doesn't really make any difference at all. It sort of it depends on how the idea shapes itself. My favorite feeling when I'm making something is that when the path is obvious. Okay, I know exactly how this thing is going to turn out. And now all I have to do is follow it.
One of the books that I'm particularly attached to that Jim made is a book called Before the Harvest. So in that particular piece, it's drawings, but they're very spare, and they can be interpreted in lots of different ways.
Our shoes looked awful. We walked at earliest dawn among the plaintive rows, earth still warm. Files and razors in hand, filthy rags, cans of stiff oil, ourselves ragged and upright as the beckoning stalks. What a noise the barn door made. In that stillness, no tool was perfect. We sat down not seeing but staring among a multitude of machines. We'd made these too, was a thought, for this dark and trembling end, where no other could be, where the final light posed brilliant.
Another book I use quite a lot is Ramona Creek, where a particular kind of support hinge for an accordion book that Jim has been working on and refining over, 20 years or something, really comes to complete fruition. And again, when any artist who comes in individually, or a group that comes in, or a class that comes in, wants to talk about how to build a good accordion, pretty much it's Jim Koss's work that I get out. And usually that particular piece is the piece that I end with, because I think he really got to the height of perfection in that particular, what we have been calling the Jim joint. It's just magical. I mean, it's just a great invention, and I cannot tell you how many hundreds of students have seen that and probably gone off and made that structure themselves and saved themselves a lot of heartache.
Even though Jim, a lot of his work looks very precise, very detailed, and when you first open it, you might think this is just too perfect, but most of the time the imagery will invite you in, and it becomes very compelling to go further. And then I think you look at the words next, at the text and the poetry.
In Jim's work, I do think it's the image that catches my eye first, but then I want to find the text. And his poetry is so precise that it almost seems, it's like it's chiseled on the page.
Springs rise, tangible at last, from winter's frost-wrapped core. From stiff-peaked barbs, tiny buds stir up soft green tide. No stone hinders, no heartbeat betrays, no phantasm floods. Their silence is the predicament words endure, summoning theirselves to perform, to embrace one another as the Ford's order, persuasion opening to storm.
Poetry was marvelous because it opened up all kinds of possibilities for me, not only for actually making words, but also later on for teaching. And I just discovered the magic of putting these words together as a kind of puzzle that you figure out. There were several inspirational poets that I really enjoyed. One was Ezra Pound. I realized, oh, the cantos, this is so boss. And it turns out that the cantos were, it's all one poem that he wrote over a series of 40 or 50 years. It's made up of segments, but he meant it all as one piece. And I thought, oh, this is a cool idea, something you could spend years and years and years doing. The other was Wallace Stevens. I read a poem by Wallace Stevens that was just, I couldn't figure it out at all. I said, oh boy, what the hell's going on in here? And then suddenly something just went crazy, and I saw it, this is like an illumination. I suddenly realized how poetry can work. That's where I started writing what I thought was seriously writing. So we got to the point where I was writing, I was making images. I realized that you could say things with images and say things with words, but they say different things. So you can describe the same event in images as you can in words, but it's a different medium. It's like saying something in music and saying something in words. And it just seemed logical to put the two together.
When I first met him, I felt immediately like he was one of the few working book artists I knew who were really, really good writers. So I was very interested in Jim from the outset because he valued his text so much. And I really felt they were worth reading, worth collecting for here.
I am the mother of the voice, speaking in many ways. The father, my thought, seaweed red, damp dawn, full silence, know me on the road that morning, just lights. Ground I dwell and I roam, I listen and I sing. I am the maker and I am made. Sit near my wells and hear icy dreams. The flood must have absorbed much before tiding back. Down, roots, a sea. Currents penetrate the shine of a moon gone wry, gathering leapers whose touch is prayer. Long distanced as the cliffs, like cards of the houses he thought might resemble thought, how complicated becoming. The canyon from flat earth, follow an eternity to a source which I am, there being no other, follow me, follow. Into my hands you placed a painted turtle so many years ago and smiled. I have it still there.
In the summers, I used to go with my dad. He was a insurance claims adjuster, and we would drive out around Illinois, northern Illinois, the suburbs, and way out in the country, which was terrific. And in those days, there were no freeways. It was all these little roads. So, but I got to see a lot of the little towns and stuff like that, and I enjoyed that very much. My dad was he got a degree in philosophy from the University of Chicago, and my mom was a musician. She played violin, she played piano, but they were all both very generous with their encouragement and time, and I owe them more than anyone would ever know. My dad had guinea pigs, pets, when I was little. Sometimes we would have as many as 13 or 14 at a time. And it was fun. You were learning about life. They have babies and stuff like that. And okay, how to tell a male from a female and so on and so forth. And this is, this is sort of basic knowledge. But at night, we would sit around and my dad would make up little stories about guinea pigs. And he would draw the image and write the words, and I would color them in. And they were on pieces of paper about yay big that he got from work. And we would just sit around the table and do this. And he taught me how to color. You take the crayons, and first he would draw the picture, and then you do the outline, and then you fill it in. I always remember, do the outline first. And then many, many years later, I saw, oh, Van Gogh did that as well. He did the very same damn thing. So, yeah, we made these at night, and that was great fun. In fourth grade, every Friday afternoon in fourth grade, we would have drawing class, which I liked. So one time we had a portrait study, and one of the students would pose and sit, and I did a profile drawing of a person who I knew somewhat. And apparently she thought it was pretty good. So she mentioned this to my folks. She said, oh, this kid's got something going for him. She said, she told them about the Art Institute of Chicago. And my folks had never been there. They'd lived there all their lives, but they were not wealthy people, and they didn't have the opportunity to, or the chance, or the inkling to go down there. We went to the Art Institute, and I was just impressed by this magnificent palace of stuff. And we went in, and I just was instantly mesmerized. And I saw art. There were two people who really impressed me at the time. One was the Art Institute has a lot of pieces by Cornell. But I thought, oh, this is so cool. It's an image in a box. It's small, and it's mysterious, and it's really beautiful, and it's there for people to see. The other was a painting by El Greco, an enormous. I mean, we're going from something intimate to something enormous. So they have a school at the Art Institute, a junior school. They called it the junior school at that time, in the summer. So I went there, and I fell in love with the place. The neat thing was that you got a badge, and you could wander around the museum. You didn't have to pay anybody. You just went wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted. It was like an entry to another world. And I realized pretty early on that I wanted to be one of those people. I wanted to have something that people would see. I wanted to make things that people could see.
Tease, cog, slog, slam, cram, crunch, bunch, grind, rhyme, cure, spur, nut, shut, stem, trim, task, mask, pry, fury, pound, scrounge, rack, pack, slide, glide, rim, skim, screw, chew, form, corm, bust, rust, shell, spell, rod, prod, slake, stake, steam, cream, shaft, heft, blade, spade, shin, fin, wheel, peel, skin, pin, grate, slate, cap, tap.
So Alphabet Beach was a book that definitely came out of experiences that Jim and I shared together. It was really inspired by our time at Rosario Beach. That is a place that we've returned to as sort of a sacred spot year after year. It's fairly rugged terrain. You climb to the top of it, and there's a very tough fir tree up there, which is there all the time, and a beautiful view. But there's something about the openness and the completely undeveloped nature of this place that just is perfect. We then lived in an old farmhouse, and it had had a 80 or 90-year-old tree that had come to the end of its life. So of course we saved the wood, and always with the idea of doing something with it. So he had sliced some of the branches into rounds with the idea that he would perhaps also inscribe some letter or some imagery on it. But when he proofed it, he decided they looked so great the way they were because they had very strong grain, and it was just the right thing to do.
When I was around 5 or 6, my mom would set me down in front of the TV. There was a television show of Japanese brush painting, which I just fell in love with. I thought this guy would sit on the floor and demonstrate the proper use of the Japanese brush and painting bamboo and fish and trees and Mount Fuji, none of which I had ever seen, except fishing rods were bamboo. But I loved that. It was terrific. 73, In summer, I got a scholarship to go to school in Japan, Osaka, University of the Arts. I spent the summer there learning woodblock printing, and that was also an eye-opener, partly because I seem to love everything Japanese, and partly because I met some people along the way who, even now, are friends. This was 1973, so it was a long time ago. But ever since that time, the Japanese influence in my work has been consistent, has been almost constant, which goes back to doing the brush painting in front of the TV when I was 6, and then to school in Japan.
I think the visit to Japan that Jim made early in his life was very influential, but I also know that he was influenced, I think, by the Japanese aesthetic even before that. That trip, I believe, affected pretty much his whole life, his art life, but also his inner life. I think the spare quality of a lot of Japanese art and writing, to sort of look at it from a poetic point of view, one of the things you learn in classes that teach you to write poetry is to have every single word work really hard for you. You don't have any extraneous words. So Jim Koss's book, Phoenix, contains these absolutely exquisite paper cuts, very Asian in style, but the inspiration is the railroad and railroad tracks. The book itself is a Japanese side-sewn binding. It's the best one in our collection by a modern artist. It does everything right and nothing wrong. And probably the thing that impressed me the most when I first met him and saw that book is that he told me that the paper cuts were done with a scalpel without any tracing or drawing in advance. He just did them straight out. And I thought that was amazing, and I still think it's amazing. His piece, Black Bowl, I think is particularly inspiring to students because it's a series of monoprints based on a single tea bowl that's at the Seattle Art Museum. And they're just gorgeous images. Again, he's able to make black on white really, really rich. Lots of depth to that.
One of my favorite books also is The Black Bowl at the library. That's monotype. It was finger painting. I mean, what the hell? You got that's all it is. It's finger painting, and I love doing it. It just feels it's an essential thing. And it goes back to being a kid. You just have so much fun doing this, but it's different. So I went to school in Japan. Came back to Chicago to finish undergrad, and I just went crazy. One summer I did 200 woodblock prints. I was very fortunate to have really good teachers in undergrad school, and that got me interested in teaching. I thought, oh, this is kind of an interesting activity, because you're always involved with what you like. And so I said, okay, in order to get a teaching job, you got to go to graduate school. I was going to go there anyway. And so immediately after getting out of the Art Institute, I got a BFA at the Art Institute in Chicago. I also wanted to travel, so I got a car and I headed straight to California. I applied to Mills College in California. That's where I learned letterpress printing, at Mills in graduate school in 1975. One of the librarians said, oh, by the way, downstairs there's a letterpress studio. I didn't know what the hell letterpress was, really. I probably had an inkling of it. So I went down there. I was instructed. I had about half an hour of instructions. And, oh, this is magnificent. I love the machines. I like the smell, the wood and the oil and the ink and all this stuff and the metal type. And so I started printing. It was 1975. And I got hooked. I worked in the Special Collections Library. They were always hiring me for doing one thing or another. I was making more money in grad school than I was later on. I did get a job at Montana State, teaching drawing and painting and color theory in 1978. I loved Montana. I absolutely adored it. It was everything was cracked up to be, and even more.
The scouts had come in, saying the trail was clear to Turtle Waters, thereafter uncertain, winter storms still hanging about the mountains. But supplies would stretch only so long, game huddled far from us, the choice whether to proceed or hole up being taken from us and placed at the whim of those hills which we couldn't allow. Firelight rattled against our cabin's walls. Black windows reflected a jumble of shadows as we moved to assemble packs. We strained at maps in the dimness. The curve of Turtle Waters grinned at some joke. We carefully folded the maps and packed them well away. Montana Charlie brought beer from the freezing creek, stumbled over his own doorstep. We warmed the room with stories of clouds like mountains and mountains like clouds, disappearing rivers, coyotes, sunsets, and treasures. We corrected, made history. Outside, an owl. Something scratched beneath the floorboards.
A Night at Montana Charlie's, the book, which the library has a copy. I made 12 of those. And it was essentially a diary of events late in 77. A made-up story. The character of Montana Charlie was actually a guy who owned a bunch of gas stations in northern Illinois and northern Indiana, which we had seen driving around. And I thought, oh, Montana Charlie. In the early 70s, everything was about performance art and conceptual art and stuff. And, the painting was dead. that nobody did paintings anymore and stuff, and we were all going to hell. And I took classes in performance art and conceptual art to meet women, essentially, and to be more sociable. But what it also did was it got me involved in making documentation. Because when you do installations, I was doing temporary installations and taking photographs of them. And then you have to document that in some way. So I would make books of photographs of things that I did. And I did a book, it was called Non-Permanent Structures, where I went around and I set things in various places and took photographs of them and then took it apart again. But you had to, again, it was that sense of documentation, which then led to, because I was doing printmaking at the time, and I was interested in words, and I was tired of making big paintings because I was lousy at it. And it would take me 6 weeks to finish a painting, and it still stunk. So I said, okay, it got smaller and smaller and smaller. Joseph Cornell. It all comes back down to that stuff, or small, intimate, something you could hold in your hand. So, yeah, basically, I started making books in 72. Okay. Letterpress started in 75. Right. Once I saw my words in print, my own words in print, I said, oh, this is very cool, because it changes your attitude about writing.
Dancing in transparent brocade, and the wind lifting the song and interrupting it, tossing it up under the clouds. Odd for summer, an impulsive fingering by breezes delicately stirs pipe chimes dangling from a post west side of the house. One note, another, correspondence of incalculable thought, star-platted night, and I am alert as in a forest, tinging footfalls.
Plots like proverbs grew to fantastic proportion. Heroes spurned them and balled their fists full of loose change and receipts. They counted ashes and separated the flakes from the grains. They murmured among themselves, defining independence over Boilermakers.
The ghost plays originated from the Japanese influence, from the idea of serial imagery, the idea of combining words and images, and from my early experience with comic books, Uncle Scrooge, Donald Duck. I liked serial images. So I got this idea to make a series of drawings, watercolors, that would have images and then words interspersed. I was also interested with Ezra Pound. Again, we go back to that you could do something that would extend over a long period of time. So early on, I started these in 1975, the watercolor pen and ink stories and poems and images. And I was decided right away in 75 that I was going to make 100 of these over the years. I'm up to 98. 40 years later. I love them. The titles, the ghost play, is from the Japanese No theater. The No play consists of a series of plays, short plays. One of them is called a ghost play or a spirit play. The idea of the spirit play or ghost play is that somebody who has passed away comes back and revisits where they had existed, lived before. Somehow I was fascinated with that idea, and I decided to make these things called the ghost plays. That's been sort of a sustaining force over the years. It's been a thing that I can always go back to, and a thing that I really believe is quite interesting.
It's a mysterious experience, but I feel larger after I've spent time with one of Jim's books, because it does draw out of me things that I didn't know were there, and that's a joy.
Joseph Albers, the artist, had a motto that he said he used to live by. It was called "To Open Eyes." Since I started teaching, I wanted to do stuff. Well, I always wanted to do stuff, but I always tried to persuade people to have the big idea, to think large, not to do insipid stuff or stuff that doesn't have any life to it, that has some importance to it. It goes back to the idea of work having as much life as I can put into it. Carl Sagan said, the collective imagination of the race, collective imagination is always. I thought that was a really nice phrase. The other nice phrase was that was Charlie Silozicki, the dealer in Portland, who wrote something about me once, which really stuck. He said my work had insistent clarity. And I said, you nailed this. That's always my intent, was insistent clarity. And hopefully if I make it clear to myself, I can make it clear to other people.
Insistent clarity. I think it's probably one of the best summations in 2 words of any artist I know. I think Jim is striving towards clarity, both clarity for himself in his own work and having it say and be exactly what he wants. I really admire his ability to continue to work in almost all circumstances, and to really be able to look deep into himself and keep finding a well of strength that he can bring out and put on paper and give to other people. And he's going to be insistent until the last day of his life, I'm sure. And I think we're all the better for that.